Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today I've decided I'm going to throw a bone to my Labor supporting audience, and we're going to have a look at which seats that are currently not held by the Labor Party that, despite an Albanese government that seems to be a little bit on the nose, they could actually be competitive in this cycle and certainly into the future. Also, just wanted to touch on my last video, which, dear oh dear, which a new audience found. The video performed a lot better than my previous videos, and I think a lot of people missed the context behind some of my seat-by-seat predictions and just saw that I was predicting a 73-seat result for the Liberals, and just went a little bit crazy. I even got called an LNP operative by one particular commenter. Rest assured, I think it's going to be a very close election, and I think a lot can potentially change between now and election day. So yes, while currently the LNP are ahead in the polls, they seem to have the momentum and the ascendancy. That's reflected in my analysis when I go seat by seat, but in reality, it's not likely that they're just going to hold that trend and that everything's just going to continue to go really well for them. I think at some point Labor does regain the ascendancy, and that definitely is going to change some of the predictions as we get a bit closer to polling day. But let's jump into the topic for today, which is seats where Labor is competitive but they don't currently hold. Now the first one is going to be Sturt in Eastern Metropolitan Adelaide. This is one of those kind of blue ribbon seats that was held by a string of mostly moderately aligned Liberal MPs, the most significant being Christopher Pyne in recent years. It's looking like it's going to be a bit of a four-horse race. The Greens will rate their chances a little bit, maybe not to pick this seat up, but to continue to poll well in. There is a Teal independent candidate who is contesting. Labor got within 0.5% of winning last cycle, and of course the Liberals hold the seat. So lots happening, and Sturt, as much as I'm not an expert on Adelaide itself, I've only been a couple of times and I don't know the area that well, but we can see in Sturt that there appears to be three distinct parts to this seat. Firstly, this area around Norwood, just to the east of Adelaide CBD, this is your sort of more classic inner city fare with a higher Greens vote. Then as you swing up north, looking at the ALP primary, we can see a bit more of a kind of working class flavour to the northern part of this seat. And then down in the southern part of the seat, we have this more kind of leafy green affluence around Glen Osmond, Wattle Park, that sort of area. So I think what's going to decide how this seat falls is where the trends are stronger. Can Dutton win over more of these sort of northern working class areas? It's possible, but at the same time, is he going to be a little bit weak down in the southern kind of Liberal heartland area of the seat? And then you throw in the Teal independent. Now, my thoughts on this is that it probably hurts Labor to have a Teal running in a seat that they're actually competitive in. We know in the seats where the Teals won last time that generally Labor and the Greens both sort of run dead. The Teals easily outpoll them, and then there's very tight preference flow from Labor and Greens to the Teal, and that's what ultimately pushes them over the top of the Liberal in those seats. There was plenty of examples where I think in just about all the Teal seats that on a two-party preferred basis the Liberals would have won them all, but with the Teal running, the Liberals were able, the Teals were actually able to win those seats. But as we saw in the Victorian election, particularly in the seat of Hawthorn, when Labor are somewhat competitive, and they held that seat from 2018, what ends up happening is if the Teal doesn't manage to get over the top of Labor and make the two-candidate preferred count, the distribution of their preference flows tends to favour the Liberals a little bit more than if Labor's preferences distribute to the Teal. So I can see a scenario here in Sturt where the Labour vote holds up quite well because this is one of their pickup opportunities and they'll be running a good campaign. And the Teal, their preferences probably won't be as friendly to Labour as Labour's would be to them. And I think a lot of the Teal vote will probably be just cannibalisation of the Green and Labour vote. So ultimately, even if there is a little bit of primary vote taken by the Teal from the Liberals, enough of that I think will come home to allow the Liberals to maintain their hold on this seat. But it's going to be a very tight race. We can see just looking at the general demographics, highly educated, not really mortgage belt, kind of middle of the road in terms of income, but as we know, there's different pockets throughout the seat and a fairly sort of standard demographic split up. I think what currently gives the Liberals their strength in this seat is the older cohorts, which is a very strong Liberal voting cohort. But as I said, it's going to be a pretty close thing. So we'll move right along. So this is Casey, which is up in, it's I guess what you would call a peri-urban seat on Melbourne's northeastern fringe. So again, we have another sort of 3 or 4 horse race. And again, we have an electorate that has a lot of different pockets. So the Liberals are quite strong here in the Lilydale area, and particularly as you follow the Yarra River up towards Seville and Wandon and that sort of area. But then as you follow it out to Warburton, you get more of these sort of tree changes that are a bit more lefty. Same with Healesville, and then that's particularly the case down here in the Dandenongs, where both the Greens and the sort of Teal-aligned independent candidate, they tend to do quite well. This is a seat that has been trending away from the Liberals for a while, and that was particularly highlighted when Tony Smith retired last cycle. The local Liberal candidate now, Aaron Violi, has been pretty productive. I don't think he's an unpopular MP, and he's seen to be quite active in his seat. I find the demographics quite interesting in terms of the potential trend towards Labour, because what jumps out at me is the amount of mortgages and the sort of Anglo dominance of this area. And then, but looking at the age distribution, doesn't really have that sort of young progressive vote. Obviously some families, and then you've got that sort of empty nester retiree type demographic that tends to break a little bit better for the Liberals. But this is an area where it's sort of a little bit like maybe the south or the north coast of New South Wales, where you do get those kind of tree change type people who maybe they're sort of into conservation, environmentalism, alternative lifestyle, that sort of thing, and that tends to be more of a sort of Green Labour voting crowd. And I think there is enough of that type of person that's either moving into Casey or already there, that keeps this seat very competitive. So we'll move along. More over in WA. So this is, there we are. This was the last seat, or this is the only seat in Perth's metropolitan area that the Liberals were able to hang on to last election when they had that disastrous rout. And it could be in danger. You would think conventionally that we're expecting a bit of a swing to the Liberals in WA after that disastrous result, and that should keep a seat like this and Canning and all those other seats that came quite close pretty safe. And yeah, mostly. But on the other hand, the current sitting member, Ian Goodner, he's lost pre-selection, and he's pretty mad about it. So he's deciding to run as a sort of spoiler independent, and supposedly he has enough of a personal vote that could actually make a difference in the race. So if he was to pick up sort of 10, 15, maybe even 20% of the vote, and his preferences spray around a bit, that could be enough to eat into the Liberal primary and allow Labor to actually catch up and win. But it's a little bit of a tall order perhaps, but it's definitely one to watch out for. moving along, Menzies. So this is eastern Melbourne. The boundaries have changed so to the point where this has become a notional Labor seat. What's significant here are probably two factors. There's the Chinese vote, which broke away from the Liberals in 2022, given their sort of hawkish anti-China stance. So there'll be a question as to whether or not that issue has gone away, whether the Liberals under Dutton appear sort of sufficiently softer on China to win back some of that vote. But also, a couple of days ago, Catherine King, I think she's the infrastructure minister, or maybe the transport minister, basically after months and months of stalling, she finally released the promised $2.2 billion in federal funds for stage 1 of the suburban rail loop, which is that rail line that kind of starts somewhere around here in Cheltenham. It's going to swing round and supposedly come all the way back round. But for now, it's going to be basically Cheltenham to Box Hill, and that's Box Hill right in here. So if extra sort of public transport amenity is going to form as a key issue in this particular area, then that's certainly going to benefit Labor. But at the same time, the sitting MP has been very active, particularly in terms of trying to mend some of the fissures between the Liberal Party and the Chinese community in this seat. And also, as we know, there's a bit of a swing on in Victoria against the Labor Party. And we definitely saw it at the state level in those by-elections last week. But most of the polling is recording a pretty significant swing against Labor in Victoria as well. So while it is certainly going to be a competitive seat, there's a lot going against the Labor Party in terms of trying to win this one. I think also just recently the 2019 Labor candidate has decided to run as an independent, which could cannibalise some of Labor's vote here as well. So a couple of reasons why Labor could be competitive, but then probably a stronger case for why they won't pick this seat up. But worth mentioning. So then we're jumping to Monash. This is also in Victoria. This is similar to Moore, where usually we would expect, particularly in this environment, the Liberals to retain this seat. But because we've got a couple of strong independents running, as well as Labor and the Liberals, it could be one of those sort of messy ballots where no one candidate sort of really properly clears 30%, and then it all comes down to preferences and it becomes a bit hard to predict. But what's happened with the Liberals is that the sitting member Russell Broadbent has also lost pre-selection, and he'll be running as an independent candidate. He was known for, well, a variety of views really, but generally as a moderate in the vein of Bridget Archer. But then obviously when COVID came along, he was sort of skeptical of vaccines, and I think he suggested taking ivermectin as a treatment. So definitely a bit rogue in terms of your typical local Liberal member. But he'll be running as an independent, and he's held the seat for a long time, so he probably has at least some personal vote, despite performing very poorly in the local pre-selection. You have Deb Leonard, who is based around kind of Phillip Island, and it becomes a question of can she sort of extend that influence out of the Bass Coast and up into South and West Gippsland. And then you've got Labor, who have their sort of traditional areas around Moe. The increasing kind of urbanisation of Warragul-Druin helps them, and then even in the 2022 state election, they did quite well in the state seat of Bass around Wonthaggi. So there's plenty of pockets where the Liberals are potentially weak, and if Broadbent and Deb Leonard are able to sufficiently eat into their primary vote, there could definitely be a problem in terms of them retaining the seat. But at the same time, again, we have that swing on in Victoria. and I'm not sure that Russell Broadbent really has that much personal vote, probably doesn't exceed sort of 7-8%, so I don't think these independents are going to have they're going to really eat into the Liberal primary enough, and even if they do, I'm not sure the preference flow is going to be that unfriendly to the Liberals that they don't win. And just looking at the demographics here, we can see not that well educated in terms of school finishing, a little bit poorer in terms of the family income, and then very, very Anglo and older as well. So the demographics really suit the Liberal Party, particularly Dutton's Liberals, I would argue, in this cycle. So to finish off in terms of the Liberal-held seats that could fall to Labor, we'll have a look at Leichhardt up in far northern Queensland. This is a seat that it's based around Cairns, where most of the electors live, and then you've got some rural areas that tend to vote Liberal, and then right at the top end, where a lot of the Aboriginal population lives, that votes Labor. The key point here is that it's traditionally a tight seat, a swingy seat. Cairns is very much a swingy area. We saw at the state election in late last year that Labor were actually able to hang on to the seat of Cairns, based around central Cairns, which was a pretty good effort given how they did in the rest of regional Queensland. But the key point is that a very popular Liberal incumbent is retiring, and he will have a significant personal vote. And even in this national mood, there is a potential that the absence of that personal vote could be enough to allow Labor to actually win this seat. On a 3.4% margin, there is a bit of ground to make up, particularly in this national mood, which is where Labor are a bit on the nose. But we saw at the state level that the Labor brand is not doing particularly badly, and this is one of those seats that I wouldn't just extrapolate the national or state mood onto it and expect it to perform similarly. So without Warren Entsch's personal vote, this could definitely be a competitive seat, but I would still rate Labor as more of an outside chance than genuine contenders in this cycle. So the final seat that I want to look at is the seat of Brisbane. Now, a lot of people get upset at me for being a bit bearish on the Greens, particularly in seats that they already hold. Now, the reason I am, it's not just because of Paran or, one data point or anything like that, which, a lot of people have been quite defensive about what happened in Paran. No, what we're looking at is a series of data points since the 2022 federal election. We can look at the swing against the Greens in the state seat of Balmain in New South Wales, where they nearly lost it. And yep, that was because an incumbent was retiring and Labor really threw a lot of resources at it, but still, they nearly lost it. We can look at the Queensland state election, where they lost the seat of South Brisbane and almost lost Maiwar. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. We can look at the ACT election, where they lost seats. We can look at the Territory election, where they made the two candidate preferred count in Fanny Bay, and then had an unusually poor preference flow that allowed the CLP to maintain their hold on that seat, or to take that seat. I think it was Labor held. Then we have the by-election in Paran, where yes, there was an independent Labor-aligned candidate who directed preferences away from the Greens, but also their primary vote went nowhere, despite 25% of Labor's vote being up for grabs in that seat. And I suppose turnout didn't help either. But still, it's not just one data point, it's a series of data points. And you can even talk about the Victorian local elections, where they lost seats and didn't perform as well as they were expected to. So, for one reason or another, it seems that the Greens are not as strong in the inner city as they were in 2022, potentially. Whether or not that's an ideological thing, whether or not, people are genuinely changing their vote, or it's because of the transient nature of the Greens voting base and they're not concentrated in the inner cities as much as they used to be. It could be either of those, it could be both of those, I'm not exactly sure. But regarding Brisbane specifically, we actually have a little bit of polling data from the director of YouGov, and what they found in some fieldwork late last year was the Liberal and Labor vote both kind of in the mid-30s, with the Greens way back on 23%. Now that's nowhere near enough for them to win this seat. They're way off the pace. That's an easy win for Labor. And I know that individual seat polls aren't really much to go off, but we do have another one that is somewhat relevant. This time it's Macnamara, the middle of last year. And again, we see the same thing. The Liberals in the mid-30s, Labor on 30, and the Greens way off the pace back on 21. So that's two of the Greens' target seats, including Brisbane, which they obviously hold, where their vote is sort of stalling out in the early 20s, which is definitely not enough for them to win these seats. So, look, there you have it. So 7 seats where Labor are competitive in seats they don't currently hold. And I guess if they're having a really good night and they're probably, they're hanging on to seats like Robertson, like Hunter, like Bullwinkle, for example, they could definitely be looking at adding to their tally, particularly in Sturt, particularly in Brisbane. Something like Leichhardt as well going their way. I could definitely see that happening. And we could definitely be looking at a Labor majority if things turn around and they have a good night. It's not out of the question. But thanks for having a listen to this one, guys. I might have a look at some Green seats next, and I know a few of you want me to look at WA. I don't have a great deal of knowledge about WA, and it's hard to read the mood there from the East Coast, but I will give it a go. We'll maybe a little bit closer to polling day, I'll have a look at the candidates. I might even have a look at the upper house there, given the new system that they've implemented, which might be pretty interesting to have a look at. But it just looks so uncompetitive at this stage that it's not really that interesting to talk about, especially with the federal election going the way it is and rumours swirling of a late March polling day being called. Regardless, thank you for having a listen. Like the video if you enjoyed it and it gives you value. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're new, I'll be coming out with plenty of content before the federal election, and afterwards we'll start looking at some developments overseas, particularly with the Canadian election coming up, some of the upheaval that's going on in Britain, and maybe even a bit of a preview of what we might expect in the midterms at the end of next year in the US. Have a lovely day, and see you in the next video.